Hello and welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is focused around running strategy, mental mindset, and nutrition. Are they independent of each other? Can one work out without the other? Our guest today, Matt Fitzgerald, will help us demystify this. Matt is an acclaimed endurance sports coach, nutritionist, and an author. A runner since the age of 11, Matt has channeled his love of endurance into writing. He has authored nearly 30 books. His many books include 80-20 Running, which is this one, um, How Bad Do You Want It? Life is a Marathon, and his latest book is The Comeback Quotient. Matt's writing appears regularly in national magazines such as Men's Health and Shape, and on major websites including NBC.com and Competitor.com. He is the co-founder of 80-20 Endurance, an online training resource for endurance athletes. Certified by the International Society of Sports Nutrition, Matt has consulted for numerous sports nutrition companies, and he's the creator of the app, the Diet Quality Score, which is DQS. A lifelong athlete, he speaks frequently at events throughout the United States and internationally. Today, I'm super excited to have Matt with us. Hi, Matt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. I'm tempted to say good morning. It's early morning here in California.
Right. Good morning. And yeah, and it's evening here. So yeah. So good to have you, Matt. And thanks really for doing this your early morning. Uh, it's like what, 6:30, 6:15 your time right now.
Yes, but I've already had my coffee. I'm ready to go.
Excellent, excellent. And like I said, you've done like so much and you've written over 30 books, and considering your vast experience and knowledge, we have so much to cover. So I think we will just dive straight in.
Sounds good.
Um, yeah, so just to start with, Matt, if you can just give us a background, like your background as an athlete and how did it all start?
I started running, as you mentioned in the intro, when I was 11 years old. My father was running marathons at that time. This is back in the mid 1980s. And I looked up to my father. I wanted to be like him, and he made running seem attractive to me. It isn't to a lot of 11-year-old boys. They would rather, play football or cricket, although we didn't have that in the States. And but I enjoyed it, and I was pretty good at it. I wasn't good at other sports. And so I kept doing it. I took a little bit of a break. I didn't run in college, but I got back into it afterwards. And my father was also a writer, so I grew up wanting to be a writer as well. And I didn't plan to marry my interest in endurance sports with my passion for writing, but that's the way it worked out. And it just gave me all the more incentive to keep at it. I'll be 50 years old in a couple of months, and still on the same path I've been on for most of my life.
Right. And like you rightly said, I mean, it's not easy for an 11-year-old to, start running. I mean, you start looking at like team games mostly. That's how people kind of grow up. So it's amazing.
Yeah, it helped actually that I suffered a devastating knee injury playing, what we call soccer in the States. So that pretty much eliminated those other sports for me, which was really a blessing in disguise because I had more potential with the running anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was at age 14. So from then on, no more skiing, no more basketball, just running.
Right. Got it. And what principles, like, you coach people, you're an athlete, you're like a writer. So what principles does your coaching stand on? And what is it that you drive through your coaching and writing?
Above all, I consider myself a pragmatist. I see a lot of people in the coaching realm or, even the diet nutrition realm, they'll they'll latch onto an ideology or some sort of paradigm, and they go all in for that, and then they really don't want to change their mind. This is my philosophy, and this is what it will always be. For me, I just want to know what is effective, and I don't care if it's something I knew all along or if it's something that requires me to change my mind or is surprising. I just want to know what works, and that's it helps for me that I'm an athlete myself, because I care a lot about my own fitness and performance. So I'm very selective in the methods I choose to use, and I hold the same standard in my coaching. I'm not going to tell my athletes to train or eat or use their minds in ways that I don't apply to myself. So I'm very pragmatic, and also very focused on real world best practices. I think science is wonderful, but it's really become quite a bit overblown. It's actually not that all that easy to perform science that has real relevance to a sport that takes place in our messy real world. And I see mistakes being made all the time when people over rely on science or misapply science. So again, starting with my own athletics, I've had a bias toward trying to identify what it is that the winners are doing, and then scale it down to my level, because I'm not nor have ever been an elite athlete myself. So looking at the things, obviously you can find maybe some random outlier who wins races despite doing things differently, but if you see common patterns at that level, you can trust that they are the most effective ways, and if you can just scale them down to your ability, your age, your lifestyle, your experience level, then that's a pretty good way to chart your own course forward as an athlete.
Right. And what I've heard you talk about, Matt, in your other podcasts is also like, how you, like you said, spend time with the elites and the pros. And they're also human beings like the amateurs. So what is it that they are doing, be it, in terms of the physical exercise, the mental mindset, nutrition, that we are not able to do as recreational runners? So I think it's coming from there, what you actually
Yes.
notice.
Yeah, I mean, most of what they do, we can also do. It's just that we don't. An analogy I often make when I'm trying to make this point is, if you look at bodybuilding, people who go to the gym and lift weights and try to make their muscles as big as they can. Every recreational bodybuilder who's looking to build up their muscles, all they do is look at what the professional bodybuilders are doing. They model everything they do after what they're doing. And I think it's just because it's so visible. When you see someone with huge, gigantic muscles, like winning, the Mr. Olympia contest, that what they're doing works because you can see it. But
Yeah.
with running and other endurance sports, it's different. It's not really that visible. If you see 12 elite runners standing on the start line of a race, you don't know which one's going to win necessarily. So, and also, because most runners start as adults, and it's not really as much of a fan sport. It's more of a participatory sport. Most amateur athletes, they don't even pay attention to the pros. They have no idea what they're doing, and it doesn't even cross their mind that they might want to know what they're doing and borrow some of it. And really, the point I keep trying to make again and again and again is, no, you can do what they're doing. It's just, I keep referring to this idea of scaling it, because, if I say you should run like an elite, the first thing that a lot of runners are going to say is, well, I can't run 170 kilometers a week, but that's not what it means to train like a pro. It's the principle behind that number that matters. And what it means to train like a pro in terms of volume of running is just to run a lot relative to your own personal limits. So that probably isn't going to be anywhere near 170 kilometers per week, but it probably is more than you're running now. We set these artificial limits on ourselves just because instead of looking at the pros, we're looking at our peers, and our peers are often all making the same mistakes that we too are going to make if we just sort of blindly copy their habits.
Yeah, and talking about that, you came up with this book on the 80-20 rule of running. And you mentioned in your book that runners need to slow down to get faster, and it's the toughest thing for runners to actually slow down. And 80% of the workouts, which 80-20 means that 80% of the workouts should be in low intensity and 20% should be in medium to high intensity. So, this is the basic principle that Steven Seiler and, you've spent time with the elites and, you've kind of observed that. So why is it so difficult for amateur and recreational athletes to follow this? Is it that they get into that whole rut of peer pressure and kind of talking about and posting about their times because that's very close to them?
Yeah, in my follow-up book to 80-20 running, which is 80-20 triathlon, because that principle actually applies to all endurance disciplines. I made a whole list of the reasons that athletes get stuck in the moderate intensity rut, as I call it. And I think the whole list came to 9. Like, there's a lot of reasons that reinforce that. The peer thing is one. I think that based on some of the research I've seen, actually number one is if you just go out for a random 5 or 10 kilometer run or 45-minute run with no structure to it, it's just it's your basic bread and butter easy run. What the research shows and it doesn't have to be a run, it could be a stair stepper, it could be an indoor or outdoor bike, any modality. If you just tell someone choose your own pace, they will automatically gravitate to a moderate intensity. It's almost everyone will do this. They're not being forced to do anything. They're not being told it's a race. There's no prize. Just do your thing. And physiologists, when they notice this, they try to look for a reason. And physiologists, being very materialistic by nature, they were looking for something physiological. They figured, there must be some efficiency that's at that moderate intensity, or it's maybe maximum fat burning or something. So they measured everything to look at what physiologically is making people gravitate to moderate intensity, and they found nothing. The only thing that they found consistently was that everyone was choosing an intensity that had the same perceived effort level. So people are actually doing it by conscious feel. They're feeling their way to an intensity that's about, I think it's 12.5 on Borg's scale, which goes from 6 to 20 of ratings of perceived exertion. And my hypothesis for why people do that is that there are two contrary instincts at play that people bring into unstructured aerobic exercise. One is humans are very naturally task focused. When we start something, we want to get it done. Whether it's like doing your laundry at home, or if it's chopping wood or shoveling snow in your driveway, when you start a task, your goal is to complete it. So when you apply that to exercise, you want to finish it. You start it, even if you enjoy running, you really want to get the run over with. So that instinct impels you to go fast. Of course, if you're doing a time-based session, that doesn't really work, but we still tend to think in terms of covering distance, getting it done. So that instinct makes us want to go fast. However, there's a contrary instinct that we bring into these same sessions, which is not to suffer. And the trouble with getting something done quickly is, the faster you go, the more you suffer. And especially if there's nothing at stake in a random 8-kilometer run, you don't want to suffer unnecessarily. So you have one instinct pushing you to go fast. You have another instinct putting the brakes on you. And when you compromise between those instincts, where do you end up? Moderate intensity. So I think that is actually the number one reason. And all the other things like the Strava factor and and the peer factor, and even some people have an idea that, well, if a run is too easy, it can't possibly be doing me any good. That's another one. So like I said, I think there are a lot of other reasons that pile on top, but I think that the one I just identified, those competing instincts, that sort of tug of war internally, is number one.
Right. And like you said, I mean, most recreational runners land up doing a lot of their workouts in moderate intensity, especially the shorter runs. And they think it's absolutely fine, but actually it's going beyond the thing. So how do you define low, medium, and high intensity? How do you differentiate between that?
If you had asked an exercise scientist, which I am not, that very question maybe 20 years ago, well, let's say if you had asked 20 different exercise scientists that question 20 years ago, you would have gotten at least 5 different answers, because there's no, these things are just constructs. They aren't, you don't discover them, you invent them. You can define these things however you want. Some standards, physiologically make more sense than others, but there's been kind of a coalescence around certain definitions. And the most crucial one that you want to know is what's known as the first ventilatory threshold. The way to understand that is that, if you start out walking at a normal leisurely pace, and then you gradually accelerate, you gradually increase your walking pace, and if you keep doing that, you're going to get to a point where you're naturally going to feel more natural running. So at that point, you transition into a very, very slow jog, and then you continue the process from there. Once you're jogging, you keep gradually increasing. If you were breathing into a mask that measured your rate of oxygen consumption, what you would find throughout that process is that your breathing rate, as you would expect, increases as you go from a very slow walk to a faster walk to a very slow jog. And that increase is linear. But then when you get to this first ventilatory threshold, there's an abrupt spike. And that tends to occur between 77 and 81% of your maximum heart rate, which is, it's not, if you were to go out and run at that pace now, it wouldn't feel particularly hard. And you wouldn't even be conscious of this spike in your breathing rate that occurs there, but it does happen. And the reason that occurs is that when you're exercising at very low intensities, everything is driven by your brain. Like, you can't walk or run unless your brain tells your body to do so. And a lot of things people don't recognize, your brain works harder than any other organ in your body when you're exercising. And so when you're at very low intensity, your brain is activating almost entirely what are known as slow twitch muscle fibers. They're very efficient. They're very good at aerobic metabolism. So, your body's lazy. It doesn't want to use things unless it has to. But when you get up to this slightly higher intensity and hit that first ventilatory threshold, at that point, in order to keep accelerating, your brain needs to start activating some fast twitch muscle fibers, which are not nearly as efficient. They're energy hogs, and that's why your brain tries to save them until it needs them. Once that occurs, your brain very suddenly actually has to start working quite a bit harder. Again, you wouldn't feel this in any way, but it's happening. And that's why, and because those fast twitch muscle fibers are energy hogs, that's why that sudden spike in breathing rate occurs. So there's nothing dangerous or bad for you that's going on here, but the consequence of it is this: if you're just over that threshold, and you spend any time just over that threshold, the effort is significantly more taxing to your autonomic nervous system than if you're just slightly below it. So what happens is, if you do that habitually, it's fine to do it occasionally, but most runners do it habitually. They think they're at a low intensity, but they're actually just over that line. What happens is you're just building up this burden of fatigue that you never fully process. So you put this stress on your body, which is actually a little bit more than you intended to apply. And then the next time you run, some of that fatigue is still there. And then you pile more on top of it. So, the net result is you don't get as much out of however much amount of training you're doing, as you would if you just slow down a little bit. So that's a lot of physiology tossed at you, but that is the
Yeah.
answer.
No, that's good. And for everyone tuned in, there is this book called 80-20 Running that I spoke about, and this has all the stuff that Matt just spoke about on how to go about your training. Matt, some questions here. I've just put it up. What is your advice for big built people who would like to explore running, given that gravity works harder for them?
Yeah, my number one piece of advice for larger people is to mix running with non-impact or low impact alternatives to running, such as bicycling, swimming, even walking. I myself, I'm not that big, but I am injury prone. So I tend to get injured as a result of repetitive impact. So I use a lot of steep uphill walking on the treadmill. You can get your heart rate up just as high if you adjust the speed in the incline. So there are lots of alternatives to running. And I'm not saying don't run. I'm just saying if you can get just as fit as you would if you ran every day by running, maybe 3 times per week and bicycling 3 times per week as well. I myself have trained for races as long as 50 miles, running races, only running every other day. But on top of that, I'm doing an absolute ton of low and non-impact cardiovascular training. And what you may find is, I'm not sure if this person's just large and muscular or overweight. Some people who are just starting off and they have a lot of excess body fat, well, that's not going to stay there if you go through the process, right? So you can start off relying very heavily on cross training. But then as you lose mass, you can transition into more and more running because your tolerance will increase. And as your weight goes down, those impact forces decrease. So where you start off might not necessarily be where you end up in that regard.
Right. Thanks for that, Matt. Another question here. Advice for an athlete who has got back into sprinting after a long break.
Yeah, I mean, sprinting is running, and you would think running is running, but it's not. So I am no expert on sprinting. But what I do know about sprinting is that it is less metabolically stressful than endurance running, but more neuromuscularly stressful or musculoskeletally stressful. So especially if you've had a long break and you're not as young as you used to be, and you're getting back in sprinting, your initial focus should be more on like strength and mobility training. So spending a lot of time in the gym, just building a body that can handle repetitive sprinting would be a good focus. That doesn't mean that you can't start running right away, but you want to put more of an emphasis on the gym work, and then transition more into actual sprinting.
Thanks for that, Matt. Going back to the 80-20 approach, so how does someone start the 80-20 program, and is it limited to just running, or can it be applied to any sport?
Yeah, so I'll answer that second question first. Yeah, it applies to all endurance disciplines. It's worth pointing out that nobody invented the 80-20 method. It was discovered, it evolved. In my book, 80-20 Running, I talk about the history of endurance running and the different ways that athletes trained. The modern sport of distance running, as we know it, really started in the mid 19th century, mostly in Europe. And if you look, there are records of how people trained back then, and they're actually funny if you if you look at it from a modern perspective, because it's not like people knew, like nobody was born knowing like the right way to train. So there was a lot of experimentation and all kinds of variety. But obviously, some methods that people tried were better than others. And over time, there was this convergent evolution process where the methods that worked better were retained. Those that did not work as well were discarded. And that now you get to today, and at the elite level, everyone's doing the same thing. And what's fascinating is that it's not just in running. So Steven Seiler, the researcher you mentioned earlier, he was the first person to really notice this. Like he looked at endurance disciplines as disparate as rowing, cross-country skiing, cycling, running. And these athletes don't really talk to each other. They're all in their little silos doing their own thing, but they're all following the 80-20 method without even knowing it. They don't even measure intensity the same way we do. So clearly something's going on here, right? Like that doesn't happen by accident. So it's a pretty powerful argument that nature found a way. And then controlled experiments that have been done since then, where they actually take recreational runners like us and have some train the 80-20 way and others train more of a 50-50 way, which is actually what most of us do without realizing it. Even people without the genetic gifts that the elites have, and without as much ability to train at high volumes, even mere mortals like us tend to do better training the 80-20 way. So yeah, it applies to any endurance sport or cardiovascular exercise modality you can think of. So, and then the other question was, how do you get started?
Yeah, how do you get started onto the program?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing is, I mean, you can safely assume, if you're not training this way already, you can safely assume that you are in the moderate intensity rut, that you are, when you do your easy runs or easy whatevers, you're probably above that first ventilatory threshold slightly. So the first thing you want to do is identify where that threshold is for you, so that you can stay below it when you want to. The easiest way to do that is through a simple talk test. And talk tests that in this age of GPS watches and all these fancy wearables, it sounds so unscientific, but there actually is really good science showing that when you get to the point where you can no longer speak comfortably in complete sentences, that is actually where the ventilatory threshold, I mean, that's exactly why you can no longer speak comfortably, is that your breathing rate has spiked.
Yeah.
So there's, on my website, 8020endurance.com, I describe a scientifically validated talk test protocol. And it's a simple graded exercise protocol where you start off really slow, go for a minute. You can do it by measuring your heart rate. So you go for a minute, and then you say about 50 syllables out loud. Here in the United States, we often use our Pledge of Allegiance, which just happens to be 50 syllables. In other countries, I recommend that you try something else. But so you say that, and then if you're able to speak comfortably, you note whatever your heart rate is or your pace, and then you increase your pace very slightly for another minute. Repeat the talk test, and you keep going until you're no longer able to speak comfortably in complete sentences. Now, a lot of people, when they do this, they're like, well, I get to a point where I'm not exactly sure, like define comfortable. But what's great about this protocol is that not sure actually counts as no. So it's actually quite easy. Like when you're sure, right? Like I'm speaking comfortably right now. That's what it means to speak comfortably. So when you get to a point where you're not sure if it's comfortable or not, that counts as no. So whatever your fastest pace was or highest heart rate in the preceding step, when you were still able to speak comfortably, that number, that heart rate or that pace marks your current ventilatory threshold. And then it's just a simple matter of staying below that threshold about 80% of the time, about 8 minutes out of every 10 you spend training. That threshold will move as you get fitter, so that you'll need to retest. And there are fancier tests like time trials, even things you can do in an exercise laboratory. But that's sort of the quick and dirty method to get started.
Right. And you spoke about your website where people can get more details, which is the 8020endurance.com.
That's right. Yep.
All right. We have some questions here, Matt. Where does Tabata running fit into 80-20 running?
Yeah, Tabata to me is just it's one particular type of high intensity interval workout. And I don't have, like, if you go to my previously mentioned website and look at the training plans there, you won't find an exact Tabata workout, but you'll find a variety of different types of high intensity interval workouts, including some that are pretty close to Tabata. I do Tabata workouts myself, but usually only when I'm traveling and I just need something really quick and really intense to make me feel like I did something. So it's the 80-20 principle, not the 100-0 principle. So when it's easy to characterize my philosophy as go slow all the time, and that's not at all what it is. Like and me, like a lot of athletes, they really like to push. They like to go fast. And what's nice about the 80-20 approach is that because you're really taking it easy 80% of the time, when it's time to do that 20% where you really get to get after it, you feel and perform much better. You feel like you have rocket fuel in your veins. So if you like high intensity training, 80-20 is really for you. Like it's like having to eat your vegetables to get dessert. Like dessert, eating your vegetables is going slow, and then dessert is doing Tabata or some other type of high intensity interval training. So generally, if you're someone who's training to do well in 5Ks or 10Ks or whatever, you only want to do that type of workout typically about once per week. So typically, like an elite runner will typically do three sessions per week that are moderate to high intensity, and the rest are all easy. But they're running twice a day. So if you're more of a normal 6 runs per week athlete, then you want to reserve 2 for moderate to high intensity, and one of them should be moderate, not high. So more of like a sustained, like a tempo type of run, and that leaves 1 slot for like a high intensity interval session, like a Tabata workout. So there's absolutely a place for it. In fact, they're crucial. But you don't want to go overboard with that type of tool.
Yeah. And I think 20% is not less. I mean, for an high intensity and moderate to high, it's absolutely not less to go all out and give your best in that 20%.
Yeah, what's a point that I when I do an interview like this, I always hope to get the opportunity to mention that while the number one mistake that recreational endurance athletes make is spending not enough time at low intensity, the second biggest is spending not enough time at high intensity. Because if you're doing a lot at moderate intensity, you actually don't have a lot of energy to do stuff that's truly at high intensity. So when you go from the moderate intensity rut to 80-20, yes, you're spending more time at low intensity, but you're also polarizing your training. You're moving stuff out of the middle in both directions. So you're actually doing more stuff that is at a true high intensity versus a moderate intensity.
Yeah, true. We have a question, Matt. A lot of recreational runners tend to get addicted to running. No distance seem to satisfy them. They want to run every day and long distances. What is your advice to those addicts?
Well, it's possible I'm one of them. Well, I mean, the thing is, addiction is a loaded word. Some psychologists prefer to call it like a dependency, and not all dependencies are bad. Like, we are dependent on oxygen and food, and to a large degree, love. We're dependent on a lot of things that are good for us. And running can be something that, yes, like you are fit, and you adapt to it, like, and you become, if you're someone who runs, every day, and then you get injured and you can't run, you really miss it. And there are measurable physiological effects. It's stressful to not be able to run if you're used to it. And there are psychological effects. Your mood will be affected. Well, you're paying a price for that dependency, but does that make it an addiction or bad? No. The people I see who are exercise addiction is a real thing, but it tends to be tied into things like body dysmorphia and eating disorders. It's people who are mainly, they overtrain and they're not even enjoying it. Like, it's not a passion driven thing. And you know,
Yeah.
if you talk to addiction experts, you know, they distinguish dependencies and addictions based on the consequences. If you're dependent on something, but in a way that it's not hurting the people around you, it's not really it's not causing you personal harm. You know, it's not you know, sending you like on some sort of downward spiral that inevitably is going to end badly, then that's just a healthy dependency that may have some negative consequences. An addiction is a dependency that has clear negative consequences for you and or those around you. So that's a real thing. There are exercise addicts. They're over exercising for unhealthy reasons, and it has negative effects on themselves and people around them. Most people who just love, you know, especially competitive people, you know, you really have to take risks and push yourself, you know, to achieve great things as an athlete. And, you know, I'm one of them. You know, I accept injury risk. I accept, you know, just not being able to, you know, stay up late, you know, partying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess, you know, mostly I guess I'm pushing back against that question a little bit.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Just one more question, Matt, before we move on to the next segment, which is the mental mindset. Um, what kind of running surface would you suggest for training? What if one doesn't have an option to find a softer surface to run other than the road?
Yeah, I would say, you know, in the perfect world, you would be able to do a fair amount of your training on softer surfaces. But, you know, where I live right now, it's actually not very easy to access softer surfaces. So, you know, even as an injury-prone runner, I've been, in an injury-prone middle-aged runner, I've been able to train, you know, about 120 up to 120 kilometers a week entirely on paved roads without any problem. It's not ideal, but it's absolutely doable. So, you know, I wouldn't lie awake at night, you know, fretting about your inability to train on softer surfaces. Like if they're accessible and you can incorporate them, I strongly encourage it because you will benefit. But you can adapt. You know, you can, you know, you have to just sort of ease into it. Once your body's used to running on pavement consistently, you know, you might not be able to handle quite as much as you could if you had some dirt to run on, but
Yeah.
you can do it. It's doable.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of tie this back with 80-20. I mean, you can run on the road, but just follow the 80-20 principle.
Yeah, that will help. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. Moving on to the other two books that you've written, How Bad Do You Want It and The Comeback Quotient. I mean, it's like so much information and examples of these, you know, the elites and the pro athletes as to, you know, how they go about, you know, kind of preparing their mind, you know, through adversities and so on. So in the, you know, when we talk about endurance sport, what is mental fitness? And this can be in endurance sport and life in general, because like you said in one of your um, podcasts, is that, you know, we have just one brain. So it's not like
Right.
you think differently in life and you think differently while running or, you know, being a part of an endurance sport. So what is mental fitness?
You know, my simple layman's definition of mental fitness is the ability to make the best of a bad situation. You know, plain and simple. So when you encounter adversity of any kind, you know, when something in reality, you know, is not the way you wanted it to be, that's a bad situation, and you have to cope. You know, that's, you know, psychologists refer to, you know, coping skills, which is, you know, once you're in a non-ideal situation, it's not as if everyone will behave the same way in the same situation. Some people will cope more skillfully and others less skillfully. So, you know, for strictly talking about athletes, you know, there are all manner of bad situations that can come up. You could get injured, you could have a bad race or a bad workout. You could have stress in your life that has a negative impact. I mean, you name it. And so if you have, good mental fitness, good coping skills, generally speaking, you're going to get less stressed out in those moments. You're going to be able to think more rationally, and you're going to make better decisions. And not everyone copes perfectly with every bad situation, but if you're generally good at making the best of a bad situation, over time, you're going to have a lot more success and fulfillment in the sport. And I emphasize fulfillment just as much as success, because ultimately, for every athlete, the journey matters way more than the destination. I mean, you spend
Process. Yeah.
you spend 50 days training for every day you compete. So generally, if you have a high level of mental fitness, yes, you'll do better in your races or whatever, but you'll also just enjoy being a runner more if you work to cultivate your mental fitness.
Yeah, and like you said, and going back to that point, that the attitude that you have in everyday life is what you bring to the race. So, mostly when athletes, they keep comparing themselves. Oh, 5 years back, I got a personal best, and they keep comparing themselves to their younger selves, and it just gets more difficult and more difficult. And that is just an example. It's not a very big example compared to all the examples that you've mentioned in your book. But for recreational runners, injury is one of them. So people get injured, and they kind of take it to heart, and they can't run for months and months. So how do people develop that fitness? Is it inbuilt, or is it something that they actually need to prepare themselves for?
I won't lie. To a degree, it is inbuilt. Just as you can make a direct parallel with physical fitness. Some people are born with a natural gift for running, and they'll only discover it when they start running, but they were born with it. And you're not going to get to the Olympics unless you're one of those lucky people. But whether you were born with a little physical talent or a lot or anything in between, you can get better through training. And it's exactly the same with mental fitness. Some people just, we call them old souls, right? They were just like, by the time they're 8 years old, they have this wisdom about them. And you're like, where did you get that?
Yeah.
So, those people are real. Some people have, and probably you have to have that to get to the Olympics as well. But we can all get better at it. And I offer myself as Exhibit A. In a couple of my books, I've talked about how when I was a young runner, I was a classic head case where my body was clearly stronger than my mind. I had a powerful aversion to the intensity of suffering that you have to accept in order to compete at a high level, and it broke me. At that age, I could not handle it. And when I got back into running later, I really went to work on that in a conscious, intentional way. And I made tremendous progress. It didn't happen overnight, but by consistently working at it, viewing it, not just, as I hope it gets better, like I'm going to make it better. Right. It was a project for me. And I just made unbelievable progress to the point where, nothing athletically, nothing scares me anymore. Like nothing. Like I feel like, anytime I race, I'm as mentally strong as any other person in that race, which is just so far away from where I started. So if I can affect that kind of transformation myself, I know that others can too. And I see the same process unfold in the athletes that I coach individually, but it doesn't happen by itself. Like we tend to, think we all understand that we're not going to get physically fitter unless we work on it. But with mental fitness, we don't do the same thing. We don't view it as a project. We just sort of hope it improves, and it's right. It's not going to unless you take the same kind of intentional, programmatic approach.
Right. Yeah. And when it comes to mental fitness, it's not only about coming, kind of facing adversities and coming back. It could be as simple as you go for a race and you're just pressured. you just have this pressure to perform. What will so and so say? What will my friends say? And just that thing, will I be able to do it or not? So how do you use a pressure situation in your benefit instead of allowing it to choke you?
Yeah, that's a great point. I do like to define bad situations or adversity as broadly as possible. So, anytime you feel or experience a negative emotion, that counts. Like anything from fear to self-doubt to that aversion to the suffering you're experiencing, all of that counts. So, anytime you're experiencing a negative emotion, like in an athletic context, that is an opportunity to exercise mental fitness. Like, that negative emotion is something that not every athlete is going to handle in the same way. So, yes, it's a negative emotion, but it's also an opportunity to practice your mental fitness. Step one is to achieve what I call a metacognitive perspective. So, too often when you have when you feel the pressure, like maybe before or during a race, you just feel it and you're inside it. Metacognition means actually taking a step back and recognizing that you're feeling it, because you can't make a choice. Like, those negative emotions are going to control you unless you're able to mentally step back for them. Metacognition, it's a giant word. It just means thinking about your own thinking or thinking about your own feelings. So you're just watching yourself in action. Like, once you take that, once you're at one order of remove from your own negative emotion, then you can make a choice. And it doesn't mean you can erase the negative emotion. It just means that you can say, well, I could handle it this way, or I could handle it that way, or what have you. So, in pressure, which causes a lot of people to underperform. I mean, it's choking, right? when you don't do as well as you could have because you caved in to the pressure. It's a little bit. It depends a little bit on the individual, like, why you feel that pressure, and that's why it's sort of a journey of learning about yourself sometimes to get past these moments. But for some, when they perceive that pressure, it's often because they judge their worth as a human being based on how they perform as an athlete, which really doesn't make any sense. So sometimes, like, just to stick with that specific example, sometimes the best thing to do, like, step one is to step back from that emotion and recognize that you're having it. Step two might be just a gentle reminder to yourself that it's just running. It's just like the job is, like, my goal actually doesn't matter. Doing the best I can is all that matters. And my family still loves me, whether I achieve my goal or not. Like, I'm not even, this race doesn't even decide whether I'm good or bad at running. However good at running I am, I'm that regardless of whether I achieve my goal today or not. So you can just sort of relax and sort of lower the stakes a little bit. Like, all that matters is, I'll be proud of myself if I don't let the pressure get to me. And whether I finish or not, whether I run a certain time or not, I want to, but does it really matter? No, it doesn't. Like, I just want to be able to finish the race, look back and say, hey, I competed as the best version of myself today. Now, it might be a different solution that works for an athlete who experiences pressure for a different reason. For some, it's actually it's financial. Some of the professional athletes I've dealt with, so for them it might be a different solution. But still, that first step of taking a step back from what you're feeling so that you can make a smart decision about how to handle it is the crucial thing.
Right. And Matt, a lot of people have something to do before an event or a presentation or whatever. It's like they prime themselves to perform better. Like, they could have any mantra of sorts, right? So there is a question, and I know you mentioned this in one of your books. I mean, this is not the all and end all, but some people have benefited by meditation, for example. So
Yep.
for different people, it could be different things, but you just need to, I guess, figure out what is that thing that helps you.
Right. Yeah. For me personally, like immediately before a race, my mind empties out. It just, I go empty, and I don't actually think about anything until it's really just more, I'm entirely focused on process. So,
Yeah.
if it's a triathlon, I'm making sure the tires of my bike are properly inflated, that I have my nutrition where I need it, that, I've zipped up my wetsuit all the way. Just sort of like, staying deeply in the moment. Ultimately, those things matter. Like you're taking practical steps in the final minutes to set yourself up for success. And it also keeps your thoughts from roaming in negative directions. So for me, the mantras kick in actually after the race starts. But there's one for me that tends to come into play somewhere in there, sometimes before the race, more often after it started, and it's a reminder, this is where you want to be.
Yeah.
Because all of this stuff is voluntary, right? It's a hobby for almost all of us.
Yeah.
Even if you're very competitive, you do a lot of work to prepare for a race. You make a lot of sacrifices. You do all of this because you genuinely want to. Like, it's important to you. But what will happen is, like, you want to be there, you want to be there, you want to be there, and then you get there, and all of a sudden you don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just good to remind yourself, hey, nothing's changed. Like, I genuinely want to be here. I'm just a little bit scared, or like I'm feeling the pressure or whatever. But it's actually true. One thing you can't do with mantras is lie to yourself. Don't ever even try to lie to yourself, because you won't succeed. It won't be helpful. But if you can tell yourself true things that are helpful, do that. And for me, just that reminder, you want to be here. It has been really helpful.
Right. Thanks for that, Matt. We have a question. How do you train for mental fitness? Are there any training plans similar to physical fitness plans?
Yeah, I love that question, because this is what really distinguishes my approach from that of what, if you hired a sport psychologist to work with you, they might have you. Well, I'm not a sports psychologist, but they have their thing. I'm an athlete and a coach. And as an athlete and a coach, I mentioned at the outset of the interview that I'm a pragmatist. Like all I want is what works. And part of being a pragmatist is also being like ruthlessly efficient. Like you don't want to waste your time on things. You want to do things as efficiently as you possibly can. So for me, the way to work on mental fitness, which has always seemed most practical to me, is to do it within the context of the problems that arise in the course of training for and competing in races. Because if you're an athlete and you train and you race, problems will come up. Something will not be perfect every single day. Those are your opportunities to work on mental fitness. My thought is, why set aside extra time for mental training exercises when you can do it in the context of things that are already happening anyway? So just that's why I get back to like using negative emotions as cues. When you're training or even thinking about training or whatever, and you experience anxiety or some other negative emotion, that's your training opportunity, and that's where you can we haven't really talked about the concept of ultra realism, but for me, mental fitness in action is all about fully facing reality. So accepting, embracing, and addressing reality just as it is. So that's your job. So really, it's just a matter of solving the problems you have to solve anyway, but doing it in a systematic way. That is mental fitness training for me. that's probably all sounds rather cryptic. So I recommend people read read the Comeback Quotient for the full story.
Right, right. This is the book that you're talking about, right, Matt?
Yep.
Right. All right. Um, just one more question before we move into a fun element in the conversation. So, Matt, like you said in one of your interviews, that there is nothing like the act of running. There are no courts like any other sport. There are no balls. There are no timeouts, no teammates. So, running is like a solo thing that you have, right? So, what do endurance sports teach us about life and from running and endurance sports?
Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, you know, it's I just had an opportunity to write a chapter for a book of actually of academic philosophy, but it was a chapter on endurance running as a spiritual experience. And what I talk about in that chapter is those crisis moments that occur in races. When you get to that moment when these instincts, these deeply hardwired instincts, preservation instincts, are telling you this hurts, stop. But then sort of like a higher part of your being, the one that who wants to be there, is saying no, keep going, push, and you're having this this mental tug of war inside of yourself. Like those are moments of just deep, everything becomes utterly simplified. Usually in life there's so much going on, and your attention is half here and half there. And in these crisis moments, like everything empties out, like the whole world disappears, and you're completely deeply alone with your own soul. And for me, that's why I can't stop. That's why I'm an addict. I can't stop racing, because you learn so much about yourself in those moments, because you're faced with a choice. Like, in order to keep going when almost every part of you wants to stop, you need to have a reason. And that reason is deeply personal. It's not the same for everyone. So you find out like who you want to be, like what you aspire to be as a human being. Like, what is my reason for being willing to suffer, for being willing to sacrifice in pursuit of a goal? And even failure can help. I've had plenty of moments when I blinked in those moments and I felt terrible afterwards, and I had to sort of process it and wait for the next opportunity to try. And so for me, it's all packed in there. Like, I am for me, running is a sport, and I pay attention to the numbers and I try to improve, but all of that really is kind of just an excuse for the personal journey, even the spiritual journey you get to go on. So for me, I am certain I would not be, not that I'm a finished product, but I mean, like, I am not the person I would be now if I hadn't just pursued my mental and physical limits as an endurance athlete. It was just transformative.
Yeah, and more the reason for people who are watching and listening to take up running, because you don't know. I mean, there is something absolutely transformational about it, both in life and on the
There's
road.
that expression I like a lot. There's a better you waiting on the other side of the finish line. Like, if you've never crossed the finish line, that probably makes no sense to you at all. But once you have, you understand.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Matt, a fun element, I have some rapid fire questions for you. So you have 5 seconds to answer each one, or you could take lesser than that.
Oh dear.
Okay. So what does Matt do as a daily practice to impact mindset?
I spend time with my dog, Queenie. It's just so deeply grounding to spend time with a beast that is always happy.
Yeah, good one. What is the one thing that you have stopped doing that has contributed to your success?
I'm going to say actually working for other people. Just committing to being my own boss has been the thing for me.
Right. Your longest run?
50 miles.
Wow.
51,
Five
because
core habits.
I took a wrong
Oh,
turn and ran an extra mile. 51.
51. All right. Okay. And while we have a few questions on nutrition coming up, but five core habits that endurance athletes follow when it comes to nutrition.
Yeah, as described in the endurance diet, they are eat everything, eat quality, eat carb centered, eat enough, and eat individually.
Right. Thanks for that. Three most important supplements for endurance athletes.
Oh, I would say avoid the stuff that's supposed to enhance performance and focus on stuff that is more health-based. So for me, they're fish oil, vitamin D3, and iron.
All right. Good tips. Matt the runner or Matt the coach?
Matt the coach, increasingly, yes. The older I get.
Matt the coach or Matt the writer?
I'm going to confess, I hope none of my athletes are listening, Matt the writer.
Your next book, Matt.
I'm working on a book on self-managing athletic pain with someone who's an expert in that subject area. So a collaborative book that I'm excited about.
Okay, nice. And your most memorable marathon?
That one is super easy. It was the Lewa Marathon in Kenya. It was a marathon run entirely on a wilderness preserve. So imagine a safari without the Jeep. It's you on foot.
Oh, wow. Wow. And what was that called?
Lewa. Lewa is the Lewa is the name of that wilderness preserve.
Nice. Nice. Wonderful. In the interest of time, Matt, I will just move on quickly to nutrition because I do want to touch upon this quickly. And it is definitely the third aspect, which is mostly neglected. And again, like you said in one of your podcasts, that an athlete doesn't need motivation to work out, but he needs motivation to eat better. So, with that in mind, what is the basic ground rule for a runner or a non-runner just to be healthy?
Yeah, I like to, on this topic, I like to remind runners that health is the foundation of fitness. Aerobic fitness is really just an extension of health. It's an enhancement of health. And you can't get fit and stay fit unless that health foundation is in place. And just because you start running doesn't mean you have to switch from a healthy diet to a running diet. They're the same thing. You need to make some adjustments. You probably need to eat a little bit more, and maybe watch your carbohydrate intake a little bit more. But this is another area where I look to what the elites are doing. Because they, especially the ones who have been good for years, who get to the top and stay at the top. You can trust that they are doing things in a really healthy way. Like they're getting enough sleep, they're managing their stress well, they're doing their strength and mobility training, and yes, they're maintaining a healthy diet. And so all the basic rules that apply, just still apply when you're running. You want your diet to be natural, as unprocessed as possible, balanced, inclusive, not too restrictive. The biggest difference is that, especially in countries like mine, where overweight and obesity are so prevalent, we spend so much time worrying about eating too much. But when you're a runner, it actually there's a higher cost to not eating enough. A lot of runners don't eat enough, so that's something to be mindful of, especially if you're someone who's conscious of how you look in the mirror, how much you weigh. It's really important to make sure you're getting enough fuel to support the stress that you're imposing on your body with training.
Yeah, right. And also, Matt, it can get difficult to write on nutrition. I mean, I don't have your book here, but the endurance diet and racing weight, is one, and also the diet cults. So a lot of stuff is happening these days on intermittent fasting and keto and all of that. So what's your take on that? I mean, is it okay to fall for them? Is it a cult, or is it good, not good? Because people tend to get confused and they tend to kind of follow it.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough. You know, my book that you just mentioned, Diet Cults, is really all about that. You know, the question I try to answer in that book is, why can't people think straight about food? Because, you know, you hear that all the time. Oh, it's so confusing. It's so difficult. No, it's not. It's actually really easy. Like we make it difficult unnecessarily, and to a large degree, we only have ourselves to blame. We have this magic bullet mentality. Like, you know, if we know that if we know that we could be healthier, we could be fitter, or we could lose some weight, there's a tendency to look for like a magic wand, like
Yeah.
something new, something I've never heard of before. Like, you've already lost the battle if that's your mindset. It should be like that pragmatism that I recommend. Just do what works. It's right there in front of you. And so if you're like, you know, scanning the internet, or, you know, looking at YouTube, you know, looking at some wild-eyed snake oil salesman talking about intermittent fasting, saying like, this is the key, you know, well, is it? Because like that intermittent fasting thing wasn't around 50 years ago, and people were running just fine then. And it's like, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or no one should do it. It's just like, it's completely unnecessary, and it's certainly, at the very best, it's a harder way to solve a problem that you could solve very simply.
Yeah.
So
And I think most of us tend to stress out when it comes to what to eat. And, I think I've eaten too much or I've eaten the wrong thing and so on.
yes, and that's why, you know, for me, a huge part of my philosophy on diet is focus on your relationship with food. You know, one thing I've noticed, you know, has been spending time with athletes who are very pleased with the results that they're getting from their diet, is like, they're not just pleased with the results they're getting from their diet, they like their diet. Like, they don't fear food. They don't experience like fear, the cycle of fear and guilt around food. It's like, it's easy. It's just a bunch of habits, you know, like it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, you know,
Yeah.
they enjoy it. It's sustainable. And so when people get too focused on, oh, I need to find a diet that works and gets me the results I want. But if it's a lot of work, or if it's just stressful to eat that way, you're not going to be eating that way 5 years from now. So, you know, to some people, it might sound like I'm saying, oh, stop worrying about whether it's healthy or not, and just eat happy. Not quite that, you know, but I am telling you, like, if you're not happy, it's not going to be sustainable, and you're actually not going to get the results you want from that diet. So, yeah, it is what you eat, but it's also your relationship with food matters just as much, and you really want to nurture, uh, you know, that other part of it as well.
Yeah. And you have an app that you've created called DQS. What is it about and how can people download that?
Yeah, so yeah, I talk about this in a couple of my books. This concept of diet quality. Nutrition scientists, for them, uh, they define quality with respect to food is like any food that any type of food that when eaten regularly at the population level tends to be associated with health positive health outcomes, is considered high quality. So, you know, in a lot of the fad diets, they try to find some specific characteristic of foods that, like, all good foods have this and all bad foods have that. So it could be like, you know, if we didn't eat it 10,000 years ago, it has to be bad. Or if
Mm.
it's acidic, it has to be bad. But none of that stands up. Like, every single one of those standards, if it comes from animals, it has to be bad. Like, you can find specific examples where it's not true. So scientists, they don't care about all that. They just look at, well, what actually happens to your body when you eat it,
Right.
and if it tends to improve health at a population level, it's quality, no matter what it's made of, no matter what category it fits in. And what they've generally found is that, guess what? All of the natural food types are healthy, are high quality. So everything's from fish to nuts, high quality. Any processed version of any food, so refined grains, sweets, fried foods, those are low quality. They're associated with negative health outcomes. And this has been very, very, if you look at things like the Healthy Eating Index in the US or the Mediterranean Diet Quality Index, those indices are built on that scientific principle of diet quality. So they're pretty interesting because they're very clarifying. You stop worrying about like what's inside the food and just like what does it do to you. But they're really meant for nutritional epidemiologists to use, not for athletes. So the diet quality score was just my way of taking that type of tool and making a version of it that anyone can use. So it's similar to a food log, but it's actually quite a bit easier, and it's way easier than calorie counting. It's just a way of, we all tend to look at our own diet quality with rose-colored glasses. Like we tend to think we eat healthier than we do. So this app just kind of keeps you honest. Like you can just very easily create a score for your overall diet quality on a day-by-day basis. And then the idea is not to go from wherever you are to perfect, because there's no such thing, but just to make whatever systematic improvements are necessary so that you can just achieve the results you're looking for.
Right. And where can one find this? It's on Android or iOS?
Yeah, both. Yep.
Both. Okay. Thanks, Matt. And Matt, coming to you, I mean, and nutrition. So what does your daily diet comprise of? Just for an example for everyone to know.
Sure. Yeah, it's I'm a creature of habit. I live and work inside my home, especially with the pandemic, and my wife is the cook in the family. So my breakfast is pretty much the same every morning. It's like a low sugar, whole grain granola with whole milk and fresh berries, black coffee. And then my lunch and dinner tend to be a lot of, it's all stuff that my wife makes. So a lot of vegetable-based soups, some fish, not a lot of meat. And then, just whatever my wife chooses to make for it, like smoothies or green drinks and stuff like that. So tons of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, a little bit of fish, and really less and less meat. I don't eat meat as often as I used to, but it's still, it's in the diet.
Right. And you did mention somewhere about dark chocolate.
Yes. Yeah. So that's, everyone needs their thing. So my personal indulgences are, I like beer. So I tend to have, a beer in the evening. And then, one square of dark chocolate twice a day after lunch and dinner. And my wife also likes to make muffins that kind of count as a dessert, but they're pretty healthy as far as muffins go.
Yeah, so I think that part is something what would interest the viewers, the muffins, the dark chocolate, and the beer.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, it's important to understand that that you shouldn't even aim for perfect with your diet. It's actually, research shows that people who try to eat a perfect diet actually tend to eat more erratically and be less healthy than people who just try to eat good enough. So, it's one of the things I found when I traveled around the world studying the diets of elite endurance athletes. They all drank wine or had, sweets or whatever, that none of them tried to be perfect. That's, food is meant to be enjoyable. And, once you're at that level of good enough, and anything you do above that isn't going to make any difference. So you should definitely just keep those, they're different for every person, but things that you enjoy that maybe aren't the healthiest thing, you should absolutely make room for them in your diet.
Wonderful. That's a great tip, Matt. Yeah. And Matt, just wanted to kind of conclude this session now. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our viewers? Anything that we've kind of missed out or anything that you want to share?
Ooh, I could go on all day. But I guess, maybe a concluding thought is, yeah, and it's maybe been a theme of this talk, is stay focused on the process. Just you need goals. Goals are very, very helpful, but there's a tendency to get lost, distracted by your goals, and forget to enjoy now. Uh, and 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 so we tend to start running because we fall in love with it, but then as we get more serious and more competitive, we lose touch with the reason we fell in love with running. So try not to do that. Try to always, no matter how long you've been doing it, try to keep running for the same reasons that made you want to run in the first place.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you for your time. And I'm thanking all the viewers for taking out time and, listening to us. And I'm sure there are many takeaways from the session to reflect upon. And I hope that all of you have found this interesting and beneficial. And as you would have learned over this podcast, that physical strength, mental strength, and nutrition are closely interlinked. And staying focused and sticking to the basics will help us succeed in each of those areas. So I think sticking to the basics is something that we just need to kind of remember all the time and not make any of these three things complicated by any means, right? So thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for your time, and I will sign off.
My pleasure.
Thank you.